Next up, it's my pleasure to introduce the host of America's #1 wine show. V is for Vino, that's Vince Anton. A certified sommelier, he created the show after working more than a decade in restaurants. It is now the highest rated wine show on Amazon Prime. Let's take a look at his program.
Welcome to V is for Vino, a wine show unlike any other. In each episode, your host and certified sommelier Vince, that's me, takes you to a different wine region to explore its culture and history, taste the wine, meet the winemakers, and cook delicious food pairings at local restaurants. We'll break down wine topics simply, helpful for anyone wanting to learn more about what's in their glass, whether you're a newbie or a wine pro. Most importantly, we get to know the people and culture behind the places where your wine is made and the communities that shape them. So grab a bottle and get ready to watch, learn, and drink. Welcome to V is for Vino.
Thank you, everybody, for having me. I'm excited to be here, and I want to thank Steve right off the bat for inviting me. I'm here today to do a presentation about something I know very well, wine, and why it is such a magical thing, in my opinion. So the topic today is why wine is the world's greatest beverage and grapes are magical, which I know is a bold claim. It's something I intend to prove. I have 20 minutes up here to basically get you interested in the wine world. There is a lot to talk about in the American wine industry. There's a lot to talk about how you can get involved. We're going to scratch the surface tonight, and then I'll be around to answer any more questions. But I hope at the end of this you at least get a little bit of the appreciation that I know myself and millions of others have for this wonderful beverage. So you saw a little bit about what I do. My name is Vince. I'm a certified sommelier, which means they pay me to drink wine for a living. Who would have thought that was a career? I'm a certified sommelier. I started the show a few years back. What I do in my television show, I tell people it's the Bourdain meets Alton Brown of wine. We go to wine regions, you learn about the place, you learn about the grapes, you meet the people and the community who makes that region something special. We go to local restaurants, we pair wine at the restaurants. It really is kind of an immersive experience into a wine region every episode. How did I get started in this? Well, there's me full of teen angst back when I went to Los Angeles to be a rock star. But I don't know if you know this, a lot of people want to be rock stars in Los Angeles. And so as I grew out of that, I was also working in bars and restaurants to put food on the table and to pay the rent. And I started getting more and more into wine. Eventually, I decided I should go for the Certified Sommelier exam. Now, if you don't know what the Certified Sommelier exam is, it's a 3-part test, a written, a theory part, a blind tasting part where you get a couple wines in front of you and you have to say what they are, about how old they are, where they're from, and a third part where you have to serve a master sommelier. Now, the master sommeliers are the top level of the organization. There's more astronauts on the planet than there are master sommeliers. So it's a 3-part test. I went through it. It was great for me. I like studying. I like learning. But I thought, what about people who just want to learn about wine and they don't want to do any of this studying? And it's something that's a bit mystical to them. I realized there's no video-based resource doing that. And I had this unique set of skills where I had some IT background, I had wine knowledge, and so I decided to make a wine show, and here we are today. I'll tell you a little about the show later, about where you can see it, but I want to talk about why wine. Why did I pick this topic, and why do millions of others pick this topic? What surrounds it? Well, to me, wine is this beautiful amalgamation of a whole bunch of parts of our culture that doesn't happen in almost any other space. You know, wine is science. Wine is fermentation. And it's the use of oak, and the use of additives, and the use of yeast strains. So if you're a science nerd, you can find a home in wine. But if you're an artist, you can find a home in wine too. You know, the blend that goes into wine. That is something that is very artistic. When to pick, what style to make, how to use oak. So there's a lot of artistry to wine as well. So it's this great blend of science and art. Wine is history. If you're into history, you can find wine scattered throughout the beginning of pretty much any part of history you want to look at, whether it's the Greeks and the Romans, whether it's biblical times, it's throughout most famous literature, the Bible. Our founding fathers were drinking wine. It's something that is throughout all of history. Wine is politics, not just in America, but all over the world. America, we have our own version of that with prohibition, effects of which are still being seen today. Wine is still political. It was just fought in the Supreme Court a few years back. We're hoping it goes there again for wine shipping laws. But all over the world, it doesn't matter if you're in England or in South Africa, where they recently banned all alcohol and brought it back. Wine is politics. Wine is place and travel. I think wine is place, probably more than anything else, wine is place. We have a saying, it's a French word, it means terroir. It is the sum of all the parts of a place. The wind, the rainfall, the irrigation, the average temperature. And it's something that is unique to wine. What I always say is that if I'm a beer maker and I like Guinness beer, I can get very, very close to producing Guinness beer in America. I can get the ingredients, I can get the recipe, I can get very, very close. But I can't do that with wine because I can't replicate the place that it comes from. And consequently, wine is travel because we all go to these places, we go on our vacations, we visit these wineries in the places where they exist. Wine is romance. I'm sure all of you have your own stories of having a nice bottle of wine, a special bottle of wine, whether it's a partner or with friends, or memories that are tied to wine. I remember when I was young and my father was in the wine industry and he'd give me a sip and I'd smell the end of the glasses. So wine is very romantic. It's internal. Wine is geology, and this goes a little bit into terroir, but it's even more so. The geology of wine is a whole field of study, and whether that's the Cameroonian soils in Chablis, France, that are millions of years old, the volcanic soils that are in Napa Valley and Sicily, Italy, the Missoula floods that happened thousands of years ago that washed all sort of sediment into Washington and the Columbia Valley. Wine and geology are very, very tied. So if you're a soil nerd, there's a place for you in wine. Wine's economics, macro and micro. On a macro level, we'll talk about that in the industry at large. On a micro level, wine auctions, wine cellaring, wine futures, which are traded like stocks. Wine's food. We had our dinner yesterday, you're eating now. I'm sure you've had many a meal where you've had a bottle of wine at the table. Nothing quite pairs with food better than wine. But at the end of the day, when you take away everything else, you take away the tasting rooms, and you take away the sales and the marketing and the labels, wine is a crop. It's a high-value crop, and it's a crop unlike any other, and it obviously is tied to the land. A little bit about the industry. USA, number one. We are number one in the world for wine consumption, which is pretty shocking. More than France, more than Italy. And we've been growing at a rate of about 1% to 3% per year in wine consumption every year. It is a $70 billion market here in the US, and 2/3 of that is domestic. 3/4 by volume is domestic. So it's an absolutely huge market here in America. Where are we making all this wine? California, as you probably guessed, produces the vast majority of wine, about 90%, the Mediterranean climate there. But you will see other states. Washington is very popular. You've seen some in Oregon, New York, Texas, some other places that are pretty popular for wine, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, New Mexico. In fact, most states in the country do make wine in some form or fashion. And what are we growing? Well, it's almost all exclusively Chardonnay and Cabernet, tied for first and second wine grapes that you know. Pinot Noir comes in a distant third, and everything else under that. Important consideration if you're ever considering getting into the wine game is that you don't choose the grape chooses you. Grapes are very, very specific to the terroir they're planted in. So a lot of times when I have newbies and I go out wine tasting with them, and they go up to the tasting bar at a winery and they say, I like Pinot Noir, can I have one? They say, we don't make that here. It's all tied to the place and the average climate and the terroir, what works. And so that's why you'll see a wine region, everybody makes similar grapes. It's not all good. I could get into more, but there's a few things that I think are worth pointing out as far as bad. Fires and natural disasters have become a huge concern, especially in California and creeping up into Oregon. And the problem with the wine space is that if you lose your wine, your vineyard due to fire, it's going to be about 5 years to replant and get usable fruit again. It takes a while for vines to produce fruit that's good enough for wine growing. And even if you don't get taken out by fires, smoke taint is a big deal right now. It's being studied at UC Davis. So even if you're nearby and your vineyard ends to be okay, that's something that we need to be concerned about as well. Market consolidation. A few companies control the vast production of wine, both internationally and the world. It's not a ton. It's about 15% of wine we drink. But the most important thing is that a lot of these companies control what we see on grocery store shelves. And so getting in as a small winery can often be very tough from a distribution standpoint. Now, luckily, and I'll get into this later, people are more willing to buy wine direct and buy wine online than ever before. And then restaurant sales are flat. You can see the graph dropping dramatically in 2020, but the good news is that was mostly due to COVID, and as things open up, I think you'll see that number tick back up. So if I've convinced you that wine is this magical beverage that you want to get involved in, what are your options? Well, there's two main ones, and there's about 1 million ones in between, which is you grab the land, you grow grapes, you sell grapes. It is the easiest way to get involved in the wine space from a land ownership perspective. It is limited to the plot of land you have, right? It's not quite as scalable, but it is a little more simple. We obviously have the risks that we talked about, especially climate risks and things of that effect. But this is the easiest way to get involved. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have the estate winery. And not only can you grow grapes, you can sell your grapes if you have extra, but you're now making wine because you have a production facility on site. But then there's a myriad list of other things you can do in the wine space that will essentially expand your business. And that's whether you want to have a tasting room and a wine club and sales staff. Do you want to have a restaurant or a bar and have people come physically and be there and do wine dinners? Wedding venues, tours. You're adding your marketing team, your distribution team. And then there's these hybrids in the middle. There's people who have a winery. Maybe they have land and they make wine, but they don't ever have a tasting room. They just distribute their wine. Maybe it's a farm that sells most but not all of their grapes. So you have the land, you sell most of your fruit, but then you keep a little bit and you make a little bit for your own product. Or you may not have any land at all, which I know is not this market, but there's a lot of winemakers who will buy. They'll just buy the grapes. They won't have a tasting room. They will rent facilities to make the wine, and they'll maybe sell in a local, they'll rent a small space in downtown and have a small area to sell their wine or a small tasting room. Like anything, location, location, location. I like this map, by the way, because I noticed it's in French. So instead of South Carolina, it says Caroline du Sud. But they make wine, as I mentioned, in almost every state. The most important thing to know is that wines are expensive because of where they come from. When you hear about these wines that sell at auctions for thousands and thousands of dollars, it's all about where they're from. These are the most expensive wines ever sold. Every single one of them expensive because of the place that it came from. It wasn't special grape varieties. On this list, it's Pinot Noir, Cabernet, Merlot. It wasn't signed by some rock star. They didn't use any special treatment. They were expensive because of where they came from, and then additionally, who made them and what year. California wine grapes average about $700 a ton, but that all depends on where you are. If you look at Napa County, if you make Napa County Cabernet Sauvignon, you can get about $8,000 a ton. So it really, really is dependent upon your location. Now keep in mind the land in Napa Valley goes for $1 million an acre or more. So it's all relative. I broke down a few of some of the main wine regions in America, and I put them in kind of Class A, Class B, Class C. This is a very rough guideline, but your Class A's are your rock stars. These are your places that you're going to pay a premium for land. A lot of the land's already bought up. It might be tougher to find value. But if you're looking for a winery or wine land that you can compete nationally, you want this wine in grocery stores across the country, you're probably looking at a Class A or maybe a Class B. Class B is kind of this hybrid where you can find some good value, you might be able to compete on a national stage, or it might just be something that you can use, farm, and sell the grapes and keep it like that. This is much of Oregon, much of Washington that isn't the main areas of the Willamette Valley or Walla Walla, Washington. There's places in Idaho, some places in California that are not yet completely sold. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have all the other places that make wine that you might not see largely in national distribution, but maybe this is your project for a lifestyle winery, where you come in and you say, I'm going to make a winery. There's a winery in my home state of Ohio. You will never see their wines outside of Ohio, but they crush it because people go there, they show up, there's weddings there, there's happy hours there, they have wine dinners there, there's a restaurant, and they make a lifestyle winery. Or I was just talking to a gentleman yesterday. Maybe there's a niche. You know, in Texas right now, they have a shortage of grapes. I was talking to a gentleman who was telling me that he has wine land in Texas, and Texas wines aren't widely exported out of Texas, but the Texas growers don't have enough grapes, so they're buying from California. So maybe there's a place where you can hack, essentially, and really find some value. So the big question is, what are you looking for? Are you looking for land that you can farm, grow, and sell? Are you looking for an estate winery? Are you looking for something in between? And are you looking for something that you can write off a lot? We have a saying in the wine industry, to make a small fortune in the wine industry, start with a large one. Because the timelines of the wine industry are very long. You're looking at about, a lot of times, a 10-year period to get in the black. I'll talk briefly before we go about some of the trends that are in the wine world right now. I don't think any of these are going to be surprises to you. They're all things that I think are trends in across a lot of industries right now. But environmental practices, any and all, is a bit fragmented in the wine industry because you can't actually be organic wine unless you want it to be very, very perishable. There's sulfites in wine, and so putting the organic label on wine bottles is something that isn't really done. Now, you can be organically farmed grapes, but getting the organic certification usually doesn't exist. But then there's biodynamic and all sorts of sustainability initiatives. Virtual tastings, like every other industry, it has moved largely virtual, but it's been a good thing. It's been a way for people who make wine to connect with their consumers. Experiences, I mentioned this. This is, you know, you think about retail stores right now, retailers and malls. They're focusing on the experience, not just the product. People want more than a transaction. They want to show up and go to the wine dinner or have the happy hour, be with their friends, and make it a destination to come visit your winery. Weddings. If you had an estate winery, I don't know why you would not have a wedding venue. The wedding industry, as far as some of those kind of barn-style weddings on wineries, the wineries I know who have them are full, always. Online ordering and delivery, something that actually was rarely done. Up until this year, I think the 90 percentile of wines were purchased at a grocery store and drunk within 72 hours. But now, because of COVID, you have a lot more consumers who are willing to buy wine online. Now, there's some politics that come with that as far as our wine shipping laws, but the good news is that consumer demand is opening up those channels. People want to know who makes their wine. They want small batch wines. They want to know the face behind the wine. They want to see diversity in the industry. So if you are thinking about getting in the wine space and you're comfortable, I'd encourage you to put your face behind the brand. And then finally, wine that is low alcohol, so wine cocktails, low alcohol spritzy wines, alternative packaging, aluminum, tin cans, aluminum cans, wine on tap, another big portion of the industry that's really, really rapidly growing. And just some final thoughts. If I'm personally looking and getting into the wine space, what would I want to consider? Well, I'd really want to future-proof myself. With the way climate is going, there's a lot of places that are on the edge of ripeness with the grapes they're growing and might have to plant different grapes or might not be able to grow grapes that are of good quality for winemaking because everything's getting hotter. So I would buy something that's either high altitude or I'd buy something that's north in longitude so I could future-proof myself over the next 10, 15, 20 years. I want to know what my goals are. As we mentioned, we're talking, are we having a farm? Are we having an estate winery? Are we having one of those things in between? We talked a little bit about the long timelines. Go in and know that this is a great write-off for a long period of time because the wine industry can be tough and the grape industry can be tough. And I'll end on saying no man survives on an island. I've been to a lot of wine regions now with the show, all over Europe, all over America. And the one thing I've learned is that the best wineries and the best wine regions are the ones that have a really strong community where they can lean on the resources of the people in their community, whether that's for knowledge, whether that's for sharing equipment, and coming up together, and especially if you're in an up-and-coming wine region and you're trying to figure out together what works for the land. Again, thank you guys very much for having me today. My name is Vince. If you have any interest in watching the show, you can watch it on Amazon Prime. You can watch it on viasforvino.com, YouTube. I'm very, very responsive on social media, so I'd love to talk to some of you more, and I'll be around today. And I want to say thank you to all of you who help keep this country going. I just moved back to the Midwest from California, and I got to say it's nice to be back. Thank you guys so much.